Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be exploring how to build musical instruments in the browser using nothing more than some basic JavaScript and the Tone.js audio library. Tone.js is a set of tools that developers can use to create rich audio content for web pages and applications, but in this video I'm going to use it to create some actual musical instruments embedded in a web page that anyone can play. At the heart of Tone.js is a thing called the Web Audio API, which is a set of tools that live inside every browser that allow you to create and manipulate audio. However, if we take a look at the Web Audio docs, we can see it's not very user-friendly and has a steep learning curve to create even simple applications. Tone.js, on the other hand, gives us all the same tools, but with a much higher level of control and easier syntax. It was designed with musicians and producers in mind, so if you've got any experience using synthesizers or recording software, then a lot of this will seem very familiar. Anyway, enough waffle, let's do some coding. So I'm working in plain JavaScript for simplicity, but you can also use React or Next if you wish. I've created a simple HTML page and I've added the tone package from a content delivery network using a script tag. Again, you don't have to do this. If you prefer, you can use Webpack so your project is standalone. Or if you're in React or Next, you can import it as a node package. I've also added a script which contains my own tone code, and then the last thing on the HTML is this button, which is just going to be for testing our sounds. So if we have a look at the script next, so the line 1, we've got our const button, so all we're doing is identifying our test button that we wrote on the HTML page before. This next line, const synth, what we're doing here is we're using the tone object, which we brought in from the CDN, and we are accessing the synth method, which creates a synth, and then we are using toDestination, which is routing. And what this does is it says that the sound from your synth gets routed to the speakers of your computer. So if you leave no argument, then that's just the default. And then synth is an instance of this. So if you worked with JavaScript classes before now, then this should be quite familiar looking to you. Okay, so what we're going to do is we've put an event listener on the button, and we're calling the trigger attack release method of synth, which is our instance. We're giving it the argument C4, which is the fourth C on a piano keyboard, and 4N, which is the length of the note. So in this case, 4N refers to a quarter note. So all we do now, if we click the button, it makes us a noise. So that's cool. And so from here, now we got a synth on a button. It's not too much of a leap to create a piano keyboard and then attach notes to all of them. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so this is a development of that first example. So what I've done is I've declared a couple of arrays. So the first one is all of the notes in an octave, and the second one is some octaves. And I'm using these two arrays together to iterate over and generate this piano keyboard over here. So essentially we create a div for each key, and then we decide if it's a black key or a white key. And we then, for each note, generate a play note function, and we drop the note and the octave in here, and then we add it to that key with an event listener. And the net result is that we get to do this. So yeah, simple sounding synth, very quick and easy to put together. Doesn't sound very good though, does it? So let's try some different sounds. There are a number of different synths available out of the box. So there's FM synth, for example. And duo synth is quite a good sounding one. Yeah, so if you have a look through the docs, then there are plenty of instruments to choose from, and they've all got different parameters and things that you can play around with and set. In this next example, I've developed the basic piano a little bit to add some effects. So where I've got my synth here, obviously I've added some parameters to adjust the sound, but the important part is instead of sending it to destination, I'm using the connect method to connect it to a filter, and the filter I've declared in this code up here. So what this does, it's an auto filter, which is an effect that's built into Tone. And this is a bit like a wah-wah pedal, if you're familiar with that, which is an effect that kind of phases up and down. So what I've done is the filter now is routed to destination. So we get synth to filter to destination. So if you're used to like audio mixers and things like that, it's similar idea to an aux send. So what happens is quite a long note. Quite a different sound is produced now, and that's down to the filtering that goes on. And I've also added some controls to it. So obviously the creating the piano code's all the same here. And there's just these frequency controls, which just draws these two sliders with some values which get written in to the filter itself. So what we can do is we can play around with it. So as you can see, there's a lot of scope for changing the sound around. Now, there's loads of effects like this built in, and you can chain as many of them together as you want. So there are almost an unlimited array of sounds that you're able to make. Okay, so at this point, the electro synth nerds are likely to disappear into a black hole of tweaking buttons and switches to never be seen again. But what about the rest of us who want to build something that's genuinely useful? Well, once we have a few instruments, we can start making use of the transport feature, which acts as a master timekeeper. So we can start telling our instrument when to play, as well as what to play. And from here, we can start building our randomly played notes into actual patterns and songs. So in this piece of code, I've created a song array, which is a collection of notes, which each have a duration and a time. So the time refers to the point where they get triggered. And we're going to pass the song array into this sequence, which is a tone sequence class, which we're going to create an instance of a sequence, as we did with the synth before. And this gets given this callback function, which tells the sequence what synth to play. So synth trigger attack release, and then we have the note duration and the time. And then the last argument is what we actually want to play. So we're going to map over the song array to say play all the notes in that array at specified times. So once that's all set up, we're going to say sequence loop. So it's going to loop around. And then the last thing is we actually have to have a way of playing it. So we have this play song function, which we attach to our button with an event listener. And what this does, it says if the transport's not running, start it. So this is like pressing play on your CD player or whatever the kids use to listen to music on these days. So tone transport starts, that starts everything off running. Sequence start, so that starts the sequence running as well. So sequence start has a 0, so that means it starts with the transport. We can change 0 to give it an offset. So if sequence start was 0.5, for example, it would start a little bit after. And then the last part of this function is we're just going to say tone transport stop. If it's already playing, then we want it to stop if we press the button again. And that's essentially it. So let's just demo that. So we can see that's doing what we want it to do. Taking this a step further, we can build a simple step sequencer. And if you know what a piano roll is, this is basically the same principle. So along the x-axis we have time, and along the y-axis we have the notes on a piano. And the highlighted squares represent a note that's played at a point in time. And we can switch these on and off, just like that. And we can very quickly start to build up the basics of a piece of music just by highlighting squares in a pattern, like this. So that's the basis of how pretty much every modern audio workstation works at a very basic level. So let's take a look at the code and see what's going on. So first thing we've done, we've created a synth at the top, same as all the previous examples. To set up our project, we've defined the number of steps in a sequence, and we've created an array of the notes that we want to use. So in this case, we're just using the major notes just to keep things simple. So to create the grid itself, we are iterating over the notes array, and we're basically creating a row of 16 steps. So if we read through the code, so we created a row We're creating a div for the row, and then adding cells into that row, and then comes back around again for the next note, etc. And then on each cell we add this event listener that turns it active or not, which just adds the class of active, which makes it go green. And then also when you click the cell, we're adding this this synth trigger attack release just so it plays the note, so you see what note that you're pressing, just like that. So that's the basics of how that works. So the next thing, we have the control buttons, so start and stop, and we basically tone.start to start it, tone.stop to stop things. Then the actual loop management itself, we use tone.loop, and what this does, it runs a time, and this transport.position gives us like a string of where the time is at any given point. So we can take that apart, because it's separated by a colon, into quarter notes, 16 notes, like that. And we can basically use those values along with the number of steps in a sequence to create this value, which is current step, which is important. Okay, so the current step is basically always going to be between 1 and 16 along here, because we're using a modulo of sequence of steps. Okay, so for each of these steps, we're going to pass them into these two things down here. So the first of these is a highlighting function. So it basically says it selects the cells that are on the current step and highlights them. It adds this current step class, which is why you get the slightly different color on the current cells. And then very similarly, we're just using the same design to play the notes that are highlighted as well. So obviously we've just seen that twice, and that's what that does. And then we just have this other bit here that removes the highlighting from any steps that aren't current. So that's essentially that. Now there's one thing that you might not have noticed yet, but that's the synth will only play one note at once, which hasn't been a problem so far, because we've just been clicking keys on a virtual piano. But now we're making sequences, it might be a bit of an issue, but there's a very easy way to solve that. Instead of using a standard synth, we can use a polysynth. And all this does is it means the synth will now play back multiple notes at the same time, like this. So we can, as well as playing single note progressions, we can also play chords. We can also take this on another step further as well on a new example. So if we can paint notes onto a grid by clicking, it stands to reason we can also pre-paint them using an array. And that's what I've done in this next example. These three patterns have a simple function that adds the relevant active classes to the cells to create our tune, just like this. And from here, it's not a big logical jump to say that if we can use this grid to read from an array, we can also use the grid to write to an array, store it in a database, and before you know it, we've just created a simple digital audio workstation. So by combining these simple tools, I hope you can see it's possible to very quickly build some powerful audio software in the browser. And you can see some really good examples of these on the Tone.js website. The package doesn't only allow use of synthetic noises, it can also access your microphone and record audio of its own, which it stores in the browser buffer. And this is the last thing I want to show you, which is the sampler feature. Just like a synth instrument, we create it from the tone object. And in the configuration, we can assign to it an audio clip. And in this case, we're going to use the microphone to create an audio clip and load that on top of the sampler. And it works something like this. So that was a quick tour around Tone.js and how you can get started making musical instruments from a few lines of code. If you want to have a play with any of these instruments, I'll put links to all those examples in the description, as well as links to all of the code on GitHub. If you fancy having a dabble with the code yourself and you get stuck, feel free to leave a comment. I do try and read them all, and I'm happy to help where I can. Right now I'm using Tone on a much bigger web project, which I might post updates about as it progresses, so make sure you subscribe to find out more about that. I've just hit 700 subscribers and it'd be really nice to get 1,000 by Christmas. Alright, that's about it. Apologies to the older subscribers, this video was all coding based. I'm going to try and get back to a fabrication type project in the next one. Okay, thanks everyone for watching. I'll catch you soon. Cheers.